Considering that my channel is based heavily on sandbox games, I try to keep up with what new games are coming out in the genre. Now, usually this requires a bit of work on my end, but you guys definitely let me know about Robocraft too. In fact, it was already on the top of my list when the developers reached out to sponsor this video, so I figured I'd jump right into the sandbox and see what it's all about. Now, if you guys haven't seen Robocraft before, the basic idea is that you're making vehicles to fight other people's vehicles, and just to get started here, I wanted to load into the sandbox and try out one of the pre-made vehicles. And you can see here, I'm testing this out on a real map now, and I kind of just wanted to get used to the controls and also get a bit of inspiration for what I wanted to try to build. Now, this vehicle is definitely pretty basic, but it seemed to have pretty much everything I was going to need to make my own. Now, driving around a little bit here, you can see me getting in some shooting practice now, and also you can see me driving up to one of these purple hexagons. Now, there seems to be 3 of these on each map, and the basic idea is that if you shoot enough of these hexagons off, the point will become your own, and that's how you'll score points in match. Of course, though, this is just test mode, so there's no one else that can test me, so it's not particularly difficult to just get all these points for myself. But keeping all of this in mind, the next thing I did was unlocked all the parts in the game, and I wanted to start off by building something this game definitely wasn't designed for. So you can see here, I put down a basic platform, I put down a seat on the back of it, but the main thing I wanted to experiment with was the distance sensor and the area sensor. Now, I'm sure you're supposed to use these for things like detecting if there's a ceiling above you or how far you're above the ground, but I have a weird idea to use these, and I want to see if it's gonna work. And of course, to get around here, just slapped on a couple of wheels in the back, and also extended it out a little bit more so it'd be a little easier to drive. With just this though, I'm ready to go here, and I wanted to try to drive into a building. Now, I was hoping once I did this, the distance sensor would kick in and immediately show me that it's seeing something above it. I realized that the area sensor is only going to detect enemies that are around it, and since I'm in test mode, there aren't any of those, but the distance sensor is going to be very useful here, and you can see once I drop down now, the binary readout actually says 1 next to the sensor. That means it is detecting something, so with that simple test done, the main thing I wanted to try to make with this was going to be a functional engine. So you can see I put down this post here, and also in the passive joint section, I found a lot of cool things, and one of those was an axle. This should just work like a bearing here, and you can see I could put a few of these down like this to make a single crank. With this, I should be able to pretty easily make a single piston engine, and you can see just trying out the crankshaft here, it is able to rotate down, and that was a pretty good sign. Now, it seems like when you're not sitting on a vehicle, it doesn't completely simulate perfectly, but it is still working, and I was hoping once they added a piston on this, it'd be able to continuously rotate around. So next here, you can see me building up above the crankshaft, and what I wanted to try to do is add on a piston. With that though, I linked this up to the driver's seat, so whenever I click, it should extend out the piston. So with this, I wanted to try this out again, and I noticed it was kind of working. You'll see here, whenever I click, it does move the crankshaft, although it kind of just moves it down. Now, it took me a little bit of thinking, but I eventually realized I'm gonna need to add on a hinge in order for this to work. Now, I also put down another piston before that, just to make sure it was gonna extend far enough, but you'll see here, I put down an axle, and that's gonna let the piston swing side to side. And you can see with this, I'm already getting some continuous movement, although it's not that great. It's still only a single piston design, which is inherently unstable, and also manually clicking to run it isn't exactly convenient. This though is where the distance sensor is finally gonna come into play. Now you can see here, I made a semicircle out of some blocks, and I attached up a distance sensor right behind it. And you can see here, it's running completely on its own. This was really good, but it still was kind of jerky, and I was hoping that adding on more pistons should make it more stable. So next, I actually deleted off one of the pistons because I realized it wasn't necessary, but now I wanted to try to add on some other cranks. This is difficult because I need a way to transfer the rotation through a solid block, but fortunately using this axle does seem to work. And at this point, it was pretty much just copy paste from before. You can see what I have here is another piston, but this is where I ran into a problem. I can't start the piston fully expanded, and what that means is that I have no convenient way to offset the first piston from the second one. Now, loading in here, you can kind of see what I'm getting at because there's no way to attach it up, which means it's not adding any additional power at all. So next, you can see I went ahead here and actually deleted off that design, and instead I started building this rod upwards. Now, on on this rod, you can see I put down a thruster, and this was my new plan for propulsion. Instead of using pistons, I wanted to use these thrusters, and they seem to have a pretty good amount of force. The only thing was I needed them to face directly up, and to make this work, I was going to need to do a minor redesign of the engine. And once I had a couple of thrusters in the first piston here, you can see I'm adding on a hinge, and I'm adding on a telescopic joint. This is going to keep the thrusters facing more or less straight up and down, and with this, you can see here I was sort of able to get this to work. Now again, it's not that great with only a single piston, but now I wanted to add in more of them, and to have them be offset, you can see what I did is added on a servo motor, and this is going to rotate 120 degrees. Basically, by adding this on, I can copy the exact same design I had before, but as soon as I load in, I'll be able to rotate that servo, and with that, I should be able to get 2 offset pistons. Now, this seemed to work pretty well here, and already I had most of my design ready to go, and it wasn't looking half bad. So I wanted to add on that last piston now, and once again, it was pretty much just copy and paste. Now, I did have to delete off half of the thrusters, and that was because I was running into block limit issues, but you can see here, I'm able to load in and offset all 3 of these pistons now, and it's looking pretty good. With that though, now I just need to get this to run automatically, and the easiest thing I could think of was using a lot of distance sensors. And you can see now, I put one in the same place that I had before. This is gonna give me that semicircle design that will allow it to start to rotate around here, but I still was gonna need control for the 2 other pistons. Now for this, I added on a servo motor to the back, and you can see here, I added on a couple more distance sensors. Now, also by using a wheel as a load here, I wanted to see if this thing could go around. And trying it out now, it did have a few hiccups early on, but it seemed to be able to spin itself completely on its own, and overall, despite the fact that this definitely isn't intended, I think it actually came out pretty well. Now, that was probably enough messing around though, and next, I wanted to try to actually make a vehicle that I could use in combat. Now, I was thinking of what kind of vehicle I wanted to make, and I thought something cool might be to try to make a flying vehicle. So I put down another platform, and I put down one of these anti-gravity cubes. And trying it out here, it seems to have a pretty good amount of pull force. So with that, the next thing I wanted to do was try to make some sort of automatic gimbaling thruster thing. Now to make this setup, I was gonna need to use a hinge and a servo, and that's to let the thrusters both move side to side and up and down. So with those thrusters on now, the next thing I did here is threw down the seat, and that's when I realized in order to make this setup automatically move around, the perfect device for this was going to be these automatic aiming servos and the aiming hinge. Now you're supposed to use these with the weapons, but I thought it would work kind of perfectly here. So trying this out, they kind of were going right into the ground, but overall they did seem to be working. Aside from that 90-degree offset, I was able to look anywhere, and you can see that the thrusters are staying in that same direction. This was looking great, and to fix the whole thruster into the ground issue, I just had to add on a few more blocks. Now trying this out, it was starting to run away from me, and it did seem to be working pretty well. My device was tumbling around a bit, but pretty much anywhere I looked, the thrusters also were going in that direction, so with that, I cleared off the bottom of my device, and you can see I wanted to add some guns onto the front. Now I had to keep this pretty light here, so you can see what I'm doing is adding on a motor, and on that, I added on a circle to which I've added on some lasers. Now these laser cannons seemed pretty light, and they also fit pretty well into the build. And trying it out, it does seem to work, although I noticed all of them fired at once instead of one after the other. Now I had a feeling it was going to be very difficult to aim this to the air, so I wanted to make sure that I was shooting pretty continuously, and fortunately there was a shot delay option in the settings. Trying this out, you can see now they fire one after the other, and this makes it a lot more continuous. So with the main systems developed, the next thing I did here was start to add on some styling, and you can see it was a little questionable at first, but after a while I got this angular design that seemed to be protecting everything that I needed. Now the last thing I needed to do is add on these anti-gravity cubes, and with these in place and protected, I wanted to try it out. Now, it kind of just flipped me upside down at first, which wasn't exactly what I was going for, but it wasn't bad. But what was kind of a problem was as soon as I tried to use the thrusters, I immediately got spun around. And I probably should have saw that one coming, so I'm constantly trying to move to the aim point. It's gonna naturally want to flip around the body of this thing, and you can see it oscillates a lot in the air. Now to get it to stop flipping upside down, I can move the anti-gravity cubes up, and this actually did seem to fix that problem, but I still was getting flipped in the wrong direction, and I was really gonna need to do something about that, otherwise I'll never be able to shoot where I'm going. So you can see I deleted off the back here, and I moved it up to the front. The hope was that this was gonna allow me to naturally want to stabilize, although I was worried I was blocking my thruster's outputs. Now, I also had to move around my gun here to make it go further up, and after that, you can see I also moved further up the anti-gravity cubes. Now, with this design, I had to unfortunately get rid of my aesthetics for now, but this actually was working pretty well. The thrusters didn't seem to be blocked too badly, and I was able to move around and go where I wanted. There is still a little bit of oscillation as I try to move around, and this does make aiming a little bit difficult, but it is manageable, and I was hoping once I added on some body panels, it would smooth it out. So I painted the whole thing up red here, and you can see I finished up by just touching up the gun. This was definitely flying a lot better than before, and I was hoping with this, it might actually be useful. And with this fully designed, I wanted to try loading up into an online match. Now, at first here, I ended up deciding to go with one of the pre-made tanks, mainly so I could get an idea for how combat works, and I wanted to see how this would go. Now, starting out here, I wanted to just try getting one of these checkpoints, and also not blocking my teammates trying to get the checkpoints, and it was going alright. The gun on this tank is definitely not high speed, which makes it a little bit difficult to get some points, but fighting people is actually pretty good with it. Now, I noticed our checkpoint was kind of getting overrun, so I wanted to try to get a few shots off here, and also try not to die in the process. Now, eventually, I was able to locate my first victim here, and you can see this turret is actually pretty good at pulling off some blocks. Now, fortunately, I'm also pretty well armored here, so it's easy to just kind of pulverize that. After that, I kind of just took it upon myself to try to defend this checkpoint here, and try not to push my luck by advancing too far. Now, you can see after a while of battling, I did make one big mistake. I half didn't realize I probably should respawn and not have a half damage tank when I'm around here, but I didn't do that, so you'll see that's gonna be a problem in just a little bit. Now, as we finished off this last guy here, this massive tank came in with 2 people in it, and it kinda just seemed like it was gonna be bad news. Now, I tried getting a few shots off on this thing, but unfortunately, it was way stronger than I was, and even mostly hiding here was definitely not safe. My teammate got completely destroyed in like half a second here, and the more I tried to get these guys, the more I realized I was never going to beat them. It was more a challenge of how far I could hold them off for. Now, unfortunately, my damage tank stood literally no chance at this point, and I ended up getting crushed almost immediately, which immediately kicked me out of the tank, and then I promptly got shot and then died. Now, fortunately, though, we had enough of a lead at this point that it was a pretty much guaranteed win, but I was playing that one pretty safe, and I really wanted to try out my own vehicle. Now, I did start out by using a tank, because I realized starting out in a flying vehicle probably wasn't gonna get the checkpoints very well, but I figured after I died in this one, I'd try to move into the flying vehicle. I noticed a lot of other people have this strategy too, and it seems to be pretty good, but you can see after not too long, I made it to the mid checkpoint, and I started to take off some of the hexagons. Unfortunately, though, the entire enemy team seemed to show up all at once here for some reason, which was a little difficult to fend off. I also was introduced to this new strategy where you just like eat the opponent's tank, and it seems to be rather effective. I have no idea how I would figure that one out, but my tank was pretty much destroyed at this point, and I kind of just wanted to respawn, so I ended up just getting shot, and you can see I returned back to the start and got in my flying vehicle. We had 2 of the checkpoints at this point, so I figured it was a good time to try this one out, and after not too long, I found my first victim. Now, he seemed pretty well armored, which I realized pretty quickly these lasers are not very good against, but then I found the guy that ate my tank from before, and this actually seemed to be doing pretty good against him. Me and this other guy seemed to pretty quickly get rid of him, and with the 2 of us here, and also him eating the other tank again for some reason, it actually did seem to work well, and we managed to get him. After this, I tried getting some other guys, but that's when I realized that my anti-gravity cubes are a little too exposed, and they kind of just get shot off immediately. So I was hoping that was just a good shot, and tried to get some other guys, but I also realized the maneuverability of this thing really isn't the best. A much better design would probably not have a lot of mass hanging really far back, and since we lost all 3 checkpoints, I was hoping to salvage this by getting in that other tank from before and stealing back some checkpoints. Unfortunately though, these guys are actually pretty good, good, and even though I was able to take out a few of them defending this first checkpoint here, there was really only so much ground I knew we could make up, so we had to take care of this fast. Now, I was hoping to get this first checkpoint quickly here, but unfortunately, someone came in and got up this shield, so it took us a lot of time to try to get rid of him. Now, there's clearly different kinds of weapons in this game, because up until this point, this tank I haven't really had take too much damage, but as soon as I came out here, whatever this guy had was really badly messing up my tank. The top was also probably a very unarmored spot, but this was some pretty aggressive damage, and at this point, it was pretty much too late, and we did end up losing that match. Well, I'll probably need to improve my building techniques, but if you guys want to try out Robocraft 2, you can check the link in the description, and it's free to play. Now, in addition, if you use the code in the description, and also on screen now, you can also get a free skin, which is a nice little bonus. If you have any other questions or comments, make sure to leave them down below, and otherwise, thanks again to FreeJam for sponsoring the video, and until next time.